Mentz is one of the most interesting scholars working on Shakespeare and ecology today. His emphasis is on the blue humanities. That means focusing on the ocean as the environment that covers most of our planet's surface, and yet which remains oddly foreign and even threatening, while also beautiful and life-giving to the human beings who settle near its shores. So glad to have you here, Steve.
It's great to talk to you, Julia. Thank you.
Steve, you have written several books on water. Your first one, At the Bottom of Shakespeare's Ocean, which was published in 2009, really focuses on the sea in Shakespeare. What do Shakespeare's characters learn from the ocean? And what does Shakespeare, do you think, have to teach us now about our watery world?
So I think that in Shakespeare and also beyond Shakespeare, the ocean teaches instability and dynamism. My sense is that Shakespeare, both as a poet and also as a playwright and sort of plot maker, is incredibly attracted to that aspect of the ocean, the way in which it represents change and disruption, including both beauty and terror. So the kind of ambivalence that you talked about a second ago. Characters like Marina in Pericles or Viola in Twelfth Night learn these catastrophic and world-changing lessons through oceanic travel and shipwreck. That travel can be harrowing and scary and dangerous, but also kind of opening and transformative. And I think that the other really important thing for me about oceanic encounters in the plays is that they ask us, as they also ask, I think, even characters, like Prospero or like Othello, to unlearn ideas about mastery or fantasies of conquest or ownership. It's also true historically, of course, that oceanic travel is a massive contributor to global expansion and trade and conquest and maritime empire and things like the maritime slave trade. But I think in the kind of local and individual level, one of the levels that Shakespeare is really interested in the plays, it's about unlearning these lessons of dominion or mastery. I think that this kind of water poetics is really important because climate change in the present is on a very basic, almost literal level, making the world more oceanic. Sea level rise means more sea, and especially more sea in our coastal cities, on our local streets, and sometimes even, in our houses. Old fantasies about a green world or a pastoral existence, I think, are in the process of becoming much bluer and much harder to get our old stories around.
In 2015, you went on to expand well beyond Shakespeare in your book, Shipwreck Modernity, Ecologies of Globalization, 1550 to 1719. And here it seems that you're primarily looking at prose works and some poetry. What did these texts open up for you?
I really wanted to think about two different ways that sea stories enter into the early modern record. One is this kind of literary master plot from this long history of shipwreck narratives and sea narratives more broadly, central to some of our oldest literary texts in the Odyssey and in Hebrew scriptures and elsewhere, and also a story that's everywhere present in the historical record. I mean, particularly true in the early modern period during a period of expansion and travel, but basically everywhere. And eventually, in working on this project and trying to bring together narratives from different modes, I came to understand shipwreck stories as kind of symbolic reservoirs, tools through which cultures help narrate to themselves stories about radical change and about encountering a hostile environment. And I also spent a lot of time in this project thinking through poetry as a form of craft. And I try to show in the book how the formal techniques of poetics mirror or parallel the physical technologies of seafaring, and by which I mean both the kind of the sailor's skills, the way in which a sailor masters or engages with his technologies, but also the practice of the swimmer. And I talk a little bit about the difference between swimmers and sailors as symbolic ways that we interact with the ocean, and that's something I'm still working on now.
Well, it's so much to process there. Most recently, you've published Ocean in a series called Object Lessons that includes short books on things like the high-heeled shoe, the Sony Walkman, and the hashtag by our own alum, Liz Losh. So what does it mean to call the ocean an object?
What I love most about these beautiful little object lessons books are their portability, right? They enable us to sort of get our heads and sometimes actually our hands around these little objects that the authors then sort of run into a kind of legibility or understanding. Like on a very simple level, the way that the cold salt water that's about 150 yards down the street from me here in Connecticut with snow on its margin right now is the same object, the same unitary object as the Pacific surf beaches not far from you, and all the other places that salt water touches on our globe, covering most of our globe. And then the other thing that I try to bring out in this little book is this kind of principle of duality, that the ocean seems to always want to be sort of two things at once, both alien but intimate, dangerous but pleasurable, useful but terrifying. This is a principle that really comes out of my reading of Shakespeare and the earlier book. But in this book, I took my sort of duality metaphor from Melville, from Moby Dick, and the epigraph. I used two epigraphs, but one of them is, "Shipmates, it is a two-stranded lesson." And so that was thinking about the object lesson too.
That's beautiful. And that really brings me to my final question, which is that you enjoy creating lists of maxims and rewritten keywords and so forth in your books. And that gives us a lot to think with and to take with us in our reading. What would be your favorite teaching about the sea that would be kind of quotable like that?
But if I had to choose just one teaching from the ocean, it would be a line of poetry that I use as an epigraph for the Shakespeare book back in 2009, which comes from Lord Byron's kind of travelogue poem, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. And I just put a little tiny piece of it, but I love this little fragment. He writes, "Control stops with the shore." And the implication being that that moment where the ocean begins and the shore ends is the end of these sort of dreams of control and mastery.
Wow, that's really beautiful. Well, it was great talking with you, Steve, and we can't wait to host you for the Sea Sense Conference at UC Irvine, April 29th and 30th.
I'm greatly looking forward to it, Julia. Thank you.